It began with a conversation no one was supposed to hear. Behind the polished doors of a royal residence, voices reportedly rose higher than palace protocol allows. Within hours, staff members were suddenly silent. Schedules quietly shifted, and one senior royal appeared visibly shaken. Whatever had happened between Sophie, Camilla, and Catherine was not an ordinary disagreement. It was the beginning of a confrontation that threatened to expose years of hidden tensions. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. According to Palace Whispers, the private gathering was never meant to become a crisis. It was supposed to be controlled, quiet, and contained within the walls where royal disagreements are usually softened before the public ever senses trouble. But this time, something shifted. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, reportedly entered that room with concern already weighing heavily on her mind, while Catherine stood at the center of a growing storm she had not created. Camilla's presence only sharpened the tension, because insiders suggest the issue was not simply about one decision, one comment, or one uncomfortable exchange. It was about respect, protection, and the invisible line that some believed had finally been crossed. Staff nearby allegedly noticed the atmosphere change almost immediately afterward. Doors closed faster. Conversations stopped when others entered. Aides, who usually carried themselves with calm precision, seemed unusually careful, as though one careless sentence could ignite the whole palace. Then came the detail that made the whispers more alarming. Sophie reportedly left the meeting deeply upset. Not publicly dramatic, not reckless, but visibly disturbed in a way that those around her could not ignore. And because Sophie has long been seen as steady, loyal, and careful with royal emotion, her reaction carried weight. Catherine, meanwhile, became the unspoken center of every question. What had been said about her? Why had Sophie felt compelled to respond? And why were senior aides suddenly refusing to offer even the smallest reassurance? The silence became louder than any statement. Within royal circles, that silence began to feel like confirmation that this was not a passing disagreement. It was the first crack in a carefully polished surface. For years, tensions had been managed, smiles had been presented, and loyalty had been performed. But behind that performance, something had been building slowly, quietly, dangerously. Now, with Sophie reportedly standing firm and Camilla facing unexpected resistance, the old balance inside the family appeared to tremble. But the confrontation itself was only the surface of a much deeper struggle that had been quietly growing for years. For years, the public saw smiles, handshakes, and carefully staged appearances. Yet behind palace walls, insiders suggest a different story existed, one built on competing visions, private frustrations, and growing concerns about Catherine's role in the monarchy's future. And at the center of it all stood Sophie, watching everything unfold. Catherine's rise inside the royal family had never been loud, but it had been impossible to ignore. She did not seize attention with force. She earned it through discipline, patience, and the kind of quiet endurance that the monarchy values most when storms gather. Over time, her presence became more than ceremonial. She became a symbol of stability, a future queen shaped not by noise, but by restraint. And that, according to Palace Whispers, changed everything. Because as Catherine's influence grew, so did the tension around her. Sophie reportedly saw this long before others were willing to admit it. She had watched Catherine carry pressure without complaint, watched her remain composed while every gesture was judged, and watched the younger princess become a steady anchor for a family often pulled apart by rivalry and public suspicion. Their bond, insiders suggest, developed not from grand speeches, but from shared understanding. Sophie knew what it meant to serve without demanding the spotlight. Catherine knew what it meant to smile through pressure. That quiet connection made Sophie one of the few people who could understand the weight Catherine was carrying. But Camilla's position had also strengthened. After becoming queen, her influence inside the royal household naturally expanded, and with it came a new layer of palace politics. Every invitation, every duty, every public role now carried deeper meaning. some courtiers reportedly began to see two very different royal styles forming: Catherine's careful, future-facing sense of duty, and Camilla's more established grip on present influence. Neither side needed to declare a battle for people to feel one forming. The palace has always understood silent divisions better than spoken ones. A delayed reply, a changed seating plan, a missing name from a private conversation inside royal life. Even small moves can become warnings. Soon, insiders began whispering that courtiers had quietly split into informal camps. Some believed Catherine represented the monarchy's next chapter, the cleaner and calmer image the public trusted. Others believed Camilla's authority as queen could not be challenged, even indirectly. Sophie, standing between loyalty and silence, reportedly became increasingly uneasy. She did not want conflict, but she also could not ignore what she was seeing. The disagreements stayed hidden, covered by protocol and polished appearances, but the pressure kept building beneath the surface. And when pressure builds for too long inside a palace, it does not fade, it waits. Then came the moment that transformed quiet frustration into open confrontation. According to whispers circulating through royal corridors, Catherine's name was mentioned, repeatedly during a conversation that quickly became impossible to control. What started as a discussion reportedly evolved into something far more explosive, forcing Sophie to make a choice she had avoided for years. The decision at the center of it all seemed, at first, like another quiet matter of royal planning. A schedule adjustment, a responsibility shifted, a private judgment made behind careful doors. But insiders suggest that once Catherine's name entered the discussion, the tone changed. Suddenly, this was not about protocol alone. It was about pressure. It was about whether Catherine, already carrying the weight of public expectation and private strain, was being asked to shoulder too much, while others measured her strength from a distance. Sophie reportedly sensed it immediately. For years, she had watched Catherine give the monarchy exactly what it needed: calm, loyalty, dignity, and silence when silence was demanded. But that silence, according to palace whispers, had begun to cost her more than anyone wanted to admit. Camilla's alleged position only made the atmosphere more controversial, because some interpreted it as firm authority, while others saw it as another sign that Catherine's future role was being tested before she had even fully stepped into it. The disagreement did not explode all at once. It tightened slowly. A pause here, a sharper reply there. A room that had begun with polished restraint reportedly became heavy with emotion. Staff members nearby are said to have noticed the change before anyone spoke of it openly. Movements became cautious. Messages were delayed. The usual palace rhythm seemed to stumble, as though everyone understood that something serious had happened, but no one dared name it. Sophie, normally measured and diplomatic, reportedly reached the point where staying quiet would have felt like betrayal. Not betrayal of Camilla, not betrayal of the crown, betrayal of Catherine. And that was the turning point. Because in royal life, loyalty is often expected to be silent, but Sophie's loyalty appeared to demand something louder. Insiders claim the meeting ended abruptly, not with resolution, but with a rupture that could no longer be hidden beneath ceremony. The carefully managed balance between queen, future queen, and loyal duchess had been disturbed, and once that balance shifted, every hidden tension began rising toward the surface. Yet the real shock came from what Sophie reportedly said next. Those familiar with palace dynamics suggest Sophie rarely raises her voice. Known for patience and diplomacy, she typically avoids public conflict. That is precisely why reports of her forceful defense of Catherine sent shockwaves through royal circles. Something had pushed her beyond her limit. Sophie's reported stand was not described as reckless anger. It was something more controlled, and because of that, far more powerful. Palace insiders suggest she spoke with the weight of someone who had watched too much happen in her silence, and had finally decided that silence was no longer loyalty. For years, Sophie had remained one of the monarchy's most careful figures, steady in public, measured in private, and rarely pulled into the sharper rivalries that surround royal life. But Catherine's situation reportedly changed that. To Sophie, this was not merely about one royal duty or one uncomfortable decision. It was about a woman being tested again and again, while still expected to remain flawless, gracious, and unshaken. The frustration that had built over years seemed to rise all at once. She allegedly defended Catherine with unusual passion, making it clear that pressure disguised as protocol could still leave wounds. Camilla, according to whispers, had not expected this level of resistance. She may have anticipated polite disagreement, perhaps even quiet discomfort, but not Sophie standing firm with the kind of moral force that made the room go still. And that stillness mattered. In the royal world, disbelief often speaks louder than outrage. Those said to be familiar with the exchange describe an atmosphere that shifted from tense to stunned, as if everyone present understood they were hearing something that could not easily be taken back. Sophie's words reportedly carried years of hidden loyalty. Loyalty to Catherine, loyalty to the future of the crown, and loyalty to the belief that duty should not be used as a weapon against those who already give everything. The discussion grew heavier, more dangerous, because it was no longer only about Catherine. It was about who had the right to shape the monarchy's next chapter. It was about whether quiet service would be protected or exploited. It was about whether the women around the crown were expected to endure pressure privately, while others preserved power publicly. By the time the meeting reportedly broke apart, palace insiders were already speaking of consequences. Not loud consequences, not public punishment, but the colder kind: distance, altered trust, private realignment, and a new awareness that Sophie was no longer simply watching from the sidelines. She had stepped into the storm, but once the confrontation ended, the damage could no longer be contained behind closed doors. The hours following the reported confrontation were marked by an unusual sense of urgency. Meetings appeared on schedules without explanation. Communications became tightly controlled, and suddenly, the people responsible for protecting the monarchy's image seemed more concerned than ever about keeping a story from escaping. According to palace whispers, the response was immediate. Not loud, not public, but unmistakably urgent. The kind of urgency that moves through royal offices without needing an announcement. One aide reportedly changed a briefing note. Another delayed a call. A senior figure was said to have asked who knew what, when they knew it, and how far the story had already traveled. That question alone revealed the real fear. The confrontation had not simply upset the room. It had created a leak risk. And inside the monarchy, a leak is never just a leak. It is a crack in control. Emergency discussions reportedly took place as senior staff tried to understand whether Sophie's defense of Catherine had been witnessed, repeated, or quietly passed to outsiders. Communications were tightened with unusual speed. Words were chosen carefully. Casual explanations disappeared. Even familiar palace phrases seemed suddenly too dangerous, because every sentence could be read as confirmation. Staff members, according to insiders, were quietly reminded that private family matters were not to be discussed, especially when they involved the Queen, the Princess of Wales, and the Duchess of Edinburgh in the same breath. But silence did not calm the situation. It sharpened it. The less the palace said, the more speculation grew. Media figures began circling the story cautiously, not with full claims, but with hints, raised eyebrows, and careful language about tension and internal concern. That was enough. In royal storytelling, suggestion can be more powerful than proof. Meanwhile, senior royals reportedly attempted to cool the temperature behind the scenes. Calls were made, messages were passed. The priority was not only to protect Camilla from embarrassment or Catherine from more pressure, but to prevent Sophie's stand from becoming a symbol of something larger. Because if Sophie had truly challenged Camilla over Catherine, then the conflict was no longer private. It suggested a shift in loyalty, a quiet realignment that could reshape the emotional map of the family. The palace could manage a disagreement, it could soften a misunderstanding, but what it could not easily contain was the idea that one respected royal woman had stepped forward because another had been pushed too far. That possibility carried long-term consequences. Trust could cool, invitations could become careful, alliances could harden beneath polite smiles, and as whispers moved faster than official statements, the monarchy found itself facing a dangerous truth. The more it tried to bury the confrontation, the more powerful it became. As speculation spread, attention shifted toward the one person everyone believed would eventually respond. While others reportedly argued and defended positions, Catherine remained largely silent. Yet sometimes, silence can carry more power than words. Every appearance, every expression, and every carefully measured action suddenly became the focus of intense scrutiny. Catherine's silence did not feel empty. It felt deliberate, heavy, and almost impossible to read. While whispers moved through palace circles, and speculation grew louder outside them, she avoided the kind of public comment that could turn private tension into open war. That restraint, according to insiders, became her strongest shield. She did not deny, she did not explain, she did not step into the storm with anger. Instead, she allowed discipline to speak for her, and in a family built on control, that silence carried a force of its own. Observers began studying every appearance with unusual intensity, searching for signs of strain, confidence, hurt, or quiet defiance. A small change in tone became meaningful. A pause became a message. A carefully managed expression became part of the larger mystery. But what made Catherine's response so powerful was not what people thought they saw. It was what they believed she had endured. For years, she had been asked to stand as a symbol of future stability while carrying private burdens with public grace. Now, with Sophie reportedly stepping forward in her defense, many began to see Catherine not as a passive figure inside the dispute, but as someone whose dignity had drawn loyalty from those who understood the cost of royal service. That loyalty became increasingly visible. Sophie's name was now linked to Catherine's, not through ceremony, but through protection. It suggested that behind the official smiles, a quieter circle of support had formed around the Princess of Wales, one built not on ambition, but on respect. And that raised serious questions about the future. If Catherine's restraint continued to strengthen public sympathy, what did that mean for those seen as placing pressure on her? If Sophie's loyalty became more open, would other royals quietly align with the future queen, rather than the present hierarchy? The palace may have wanted the issue to fade, but Catherine's calm made it harder to dismiss. Her silence allowed the public to fill the empty space with concern, admiration, and suspicion. It also placed Camilla in a difficult position, because any move against Catherine could now be read as proof of the very tension officials were trying to deny. In that sense, Catherine did not need to fight loudly. Her restraint changed the battlefield. It turned vulnerability into strength, silence into pressure, and private pain into a symbol of endurance. But behind the scenes, another battle was already beginning to take shape. Royal confrontations rarely end when the meeting is over. Instead, they echo through corridors, influence decisions, and reshape relationships. Reports suggest the aftermath of Sophie's clash with Camilla may have triggered a chain reaction that reached far beyond the room where it began. The first sign of fallout, insiders suggest, was not a dramatic announcement or a public break. It was distance. The careful kind. The kind that appears in how messages are routed, how invitations are handled, and how certain names are placed closer together or quietly kept apart. After Sophie's reported defense of Catherine, relationships within the family allegedly began to shift in ways that were subtle but deeply meaningful. People who had once remained neutral now seemed more aware of where the emotional weight of the family was moving. Catherine, still silent, became the center of sympathy. Sophie, once viewed mainly as steady and supportive, suddenly carried a new significance as someone willing to challenge pressure when it reached too far. And Camilla's influence, once treated as an unavoidable part of the royal order, began facing quiet questions from those who wondered whether authority had crossed into overreach. This was the dangerous part. Not a single confrontation, but the realignment that followed. In royal life, alliances are rarely declared. They are felt. A supportive word at the right moment. A private call returned quickly. A shared appearance that sends a message without saying anything at all. Reports suggest Sophie's position became more important because her loyalty to Catherine gave others permission to acknowledge concerns they had previously buried. It did not mean rebellion. It meant recognition. The old silence had cracked, and once that happened, the palace could not easily force everything back into place. Future planning reportedly became more delicate. Duties involving Catherine had to be considered with greater care. Camilla's role in certain decisions allegedly came under sharper private attention. Senior aides, already worried about public speculation, now had to manage the possibility that the family itself was entering a colder and more complicated phase. Outside the palace, public interest only intensified. The idea of Sophie standing up for Catherine carried emotional power because it fit a story many Sophies people already sensed. Catherine, as the burdened future queen, Sophie, as the loyal defender, and Camilla, as the figure whose influence remained controversial. Whether every whisper was accurate mattered less than the force of the narrative. Once the public begins to believe there is a hidden struggle, every royal gesture becomes evidence. Every silence becomes strategy. Every absence becomes a clue. And as the pressure grew, the monarchy faced a problem it could not solve with one carefully worded statement. This was no longer only about what happened behind closed doors. It was about what that moment revealed. And as the dust slowly settled, an even larger question remained unanswered. The confrontation may have ended, but its significance continues to resonate. Because this was never simply about one argument, one disagreement, or one difficult conversation. It was about the future direction of the monarchy, the people trusted to protect it, and the relationships that will define its next chapter. Sophie's reported defense of Catherine became more than a private act of loyalty. It became a symbol of something larger moving inside the royal family, something quiet but impossible to ignore. For years, the monarchy has survived by controlling emotion, hiding tension, and presenting unity, even when the pressure behind the doors grows unbearable. But this moment appeared to challenge that old rule. If the whispers are true, Sophie did not step forward for attention, power, or revenge. She stepped forward because she believed Catherine had reached a point where silence no longer protected her. That is what gave the confrontation its emotional force. It was not loud ambition against ambition. It was duty standing in defense of duty. Catherine's future role now feels more important than ever. Not only because she is expected to become queen one day, but because she represents the softer strength the monarchy may need in a changing era. The public no longer responds only to crowns, titles, and ceremonies. They look for resilience. They look for sincerity. They look for people who appear to carry responsibility without turning it into personal drama. Catherine has become that figure for many, and that is why any pressure around her now becomes a matter of deeper concern. Camilla's influence, meanwhile, remains one of the most sensitive questions inside the story. As queen, she holds status, access, and authority. But the reported clash with Sophie raises a sharper question. How far can influence go before it begins to unsettle the future? The palace may never explain what truly happened, and perhaps it cannot. Royal survival often depends on what remains unsaid. But the legacy of this conflict may continue for years, shaping private trust, public perception, and the hidden alliances that guide the next generation of the crown. In the end, this was not merely a confrontation between two royal women. It was a warning that the monarchy is entering a new chapter, where loyalty will be tested, silence will be questioned, and the future queen may no longer stand alone. Because in the royal family, the conversations hidden behind closed doors often become the moments that change everything. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.